Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Kuf Ayin Aleph. Today's daf is sponsored by Meir and Ahuva Belovsky in loving memory of Ahuva's grandmother, Basia Chaya Bat Yirmiyahu, on her Shloshim, and in honor of their son Moshe's engagement to Maya Win. May Baba Chavi's legacy carry on in this auspicious new beginning. Today's daf is sponsored by Sigal Spitzer in loving memory of her grandma, Gigi Rhoda, Razel Bat Gittel, whose first year at site is today. I love you and miss you. May her neshama have an aliyah. Today's daf is sponsored by David and Mitzi Geffen in loving memory of Mitzi's father, Jack Locke of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, who passed away 4 years ago. He was so proud that all four of his children made Aliyah to Israel, and his tribe grew during his lifetime to nearly 100 family members, spanning 3 generations, now 4, all in Israel. He was a generous and loving husband, father, grandfather, uncle, and brother who is sorely missed. Okay, a few small announcements. Our Siyum, don't forget to register. Siyum is happening on Wednesday, and like I said, there's Siyumim around. Lana Steinhain and Dr. Karen Kirschenbaum will be speaking in Jerusalem, so highly recommend it if you live there. It'll be in English this time, doing something a little different for a change. If you want to also advertise it around to friends, it's a great opportunity to get more people involved in general. Masechet Sanhedrin is a great time to get people started, and it's nice to get inspired by joining a Siyum. And if you're doing a Siyum nearby, around your house, definitely invite people. It's a great way to encourage other people. I find the best way to get people to come is really just by hearing that other people they know are learning and realizing that how meaningful it is and how it could be meaningful for them as well. Another announcement, we started our Circle of Friends campaign yesterday. So anyone who wants to join our Circle of Friends for 2025, everything we offer is free of charge. So we basically rely on donations to help support all the projects, so the learning projects that were happening, which is a good time to mention that. We mentioned it a long time ago, but I will mention that Gila Fine is starting a course with us in January 5th, those 3 Sundays, based on her new book. And we're going to be learning a methodology on how to learn Agadah. So highly recommended. And you can register, and of course, you can find the courses on the website, register for her course. And also, we have new content on our website. Daf Mishalahem is going to be in English. So Rabbanit Shiur Chamutal, who used to do Daf Mishalahem, now in English. Already, the first one's going to go live on Sunday, Introduction to Sanhedrin. So very excited for that. We also have new Hebrew content. Dr. Mirav Tubal Kahan is going to be giving. So there's a lot of new things going on. And if you want to help support everything that we're doing, that would be great. It's $1 a day, so it's $360 a year, close to $1 a day. Anyway, we'd love you to join. Okay, now we're going to get started with our Mishnah. So we started a Mishnah yesterday, and it was kind of the end of class, so I'll go through pretty briefly, but I will go through from the Mishnah where we started. Misha para miktzat chovo. So we have a person who pays back part of a loan. What do we do? So Rabbi Yehuda says, we just switch the star. We basically tear up the first, right? We tear up the first one, almost like as if it never happened. We write a new one for what's left. Okay, brand new star. We didn't talk about it yesterday, but the assumption is going to be that we predate it, because otherwise, what does it help the malveh? Remember how these starot work. If I have an IOU, let's say you lent me money, you hold the document, the IOU. You can collect from the date of the document. You can collect from any land that I sold from that date. That's called lien property, because how does it work? When someone goes to buy land from me, they check, do I have any loans outstanding? So if the loan already happened before they bought the land, then that land is lien. So if I own the land at the time that the loan happened, and then I sold it to someone, that property is already lien to your loan. So if we wrote a new date on the document from the day that I paid half of it, it would completely remove the shibud, the lien on the land, right? The lien would only be on land. Let's say the first date was December, and the next one was February. Once I paid you back half was February. So now we're going to write February on the document instead of December. So any land I sold from December to February won't be lien to the loan anymore, to the second part of the loan. That's unfair. So obviously, Rabbi Yehuda says we switch it and we write a new document. Rabbi Yehuda must have meant, and we predate it to December. Comes Rabbi Yosi and says, no, we don't rewrite the star. You keep your old star that says I owe you $100. I paid you 50. Okay, I get a shavar that says I owe you 50. Okay, I paid 50. And the shavar says I already paid the 50. So when you pull out the document and say, Michelle, you owe me 100, I pull out a shavar. To which Rabbi Yehuda said, That's unfair to the lovet. What? Until then, it was the responsibility of the creditor. The creditor had to make sure to keep the document if they wanted to get their money back. Now, all of a sudden, you're shifting it onto the borrower, that the borrower has to protect themselves by this shovar. What if, right? What if achbarim come? What if mice come and eat it up? To which Rabbi Yosi said, no, we don't want to weaken the power of the malveh. That's more important. And we'll talk about this later, why it's more important. But we've also mentioned this before, so I'll mention it now. We have this concept, Eved Lo V'Li'ish Malveh, which is based on, it's a pasuk in Mishlei, which basically says that when I borrow money from you, from the beginning, I basically subject myself to your will. I turn into your slave, so to speak, because you did something nice for me. There was nothing in it for you to loan me money. There is no interest, right? It wasn't, you were just being nice to me, and therefore I'm beholden to you. And therefore, yes, I'm the one who has to keep the shovar and not make it your problem, but my problem. Okay, that's Rabbi Yosi. So comes Rav Huna in the name of Rav and basically says, I don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda. I don't hold like Rabbi Yosi. I think only the court can rewrite this document, which is sort of like Rabbi Yehuda, because he does think we write a new document, we rip up the previous one. But he thinks only the court can do such a thing. And Rabbi Yehuda never said only the court. And in fact, we'll see from a braita that Rabbi Yehuda said witnesses can do it. Okay, and it seems like maybe even the original witnesses, but they can rewrite the document. He says only the court can do it, to which Rav Nachman said to Rav Huna, or maybe Rav Yirmiyah Bar Abba said to Rav Huna, I'm just reviewing without reading it all inside the end of yesterday's daf, said if Rav had heard, oh, and by the way, before we get there, how can Rav disagree with two Tanaim? Don't we have rules? And Moraim can't disagree with Tanaim? Well, there's all these principles in the Gemara of how things work. So one of the principles is, and Moraim can't disagree with Tanaim. However, there is a principle that says, if you remember, Rav is first generation, right at that cross point between Tanaim and Moraim, and Rav has status, it's called Rav Tanahu Upalig. He has status like a Tana, and he can disagree with Tanaim if he wants. So therefore, we don't have a problem that he disagrees with these Tanaim. However, despite that, the Gemara does ask, but didn't you see this braita? And in the braita it says, Ditanya, Edim mikarim et hashar. The Edim can come, tear up the document, v'kotvim lo shtar acher mizman rishon. And they can write, predate it to the date of the original loan, December 1st, in the example we gave. So why do you think the court can't do it? And if you had heard this braita, I'm sure you would change your mind. To which he answers, Amarle, Rav Huna answers for him, because Rav Huna quoted Rav, Shmi ale v'lo hadarbe. Okay, that was the last thing we got to the end of yesterday's daf. Rav knew that braita, but he didn't change his mind. Now we're going to see an explanation. Bishlama, what did Rav think? Bishlama, it makes sense, Beidina. Of course, the court can predate the shtar. Now, the assumption here, before we even read it inside, is that, remember what happens. I borrowed money from you, we wrote a shtar. December 1st. That was when the loan happened, we wrote the shtar. At that moment, my property is lien to yours. When I pay you on February 1st, and we rip up the shtar and we write a new one, as soon as we rip up the shtar, we rip up the shibud. There is no lien. Now, we can predate a document, we can write a new document that says, well, there's 50 left over from the original loan, and we can write that the date was December 1st. But that requires creating a new lien on the property. Because it was actually when we tore the first document, it tore the shibud. The document was what was giving the shibud, the lien. As soon as we tear up the document, it breaks that. So he says, Rav says, I get it, but the Beit Din is alima. They're strong. Lafkue mamona. Excuse me for a minute. Beit Din has the strength to uproot money. Beit Din can say, even though this property theoretically it's February 1st and we can't really create a lien retroactively, but we can because we're the court. And the court, if you remember, there's a concept, hefker Beit Din hefker, which means the court can call your property ownerless and give it to somebody else. So, of course, they can create a shibud. That's not a problem. But ela edim cha'asu shlichutan, chozlim va'osim shlichutan. But the witnesses who witnessed the first loan and signed on the document saying this loan was taken, and now is signing on a new document, they don't have the power to create with a new document a shibud retroactively. Now, I know you're thinking, like, but it was there. But the point is that Rav believes, and obviously not everyone believed this because Rabbi Yehuda thinks you can do this. But Rav believed that when you tear up that document, the shibud is gone, and we're creating a new lien of property, and that only the court can do retroactively. But no one else can do that retroactively. The Adim can't do that. To which the Gemara says, "Velo, what do you mean you can't do that? Let's look at this source." And not only that, but you yourself, okay, before we questioned it from Rabbi Yehuda, now we're going to say, Rav, you yourself said something like this. V'hama Rabbi Yehuda amarav, edim kotvim afilu asara shtarot al sadeh echad. Witnesses could write even 10 documents on one field, meaning if the owner of the field comes and says, I lost my document, rewrite me a new one, you can do it. You can keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. And then we assume, right, every time the owner says, I lost the document, we write the owner a new document. That sounds like, right? Because what is the document? The document is I bought this land, usually ba'achrayut, remember, with a guarantee. So that would allow them theoretically to collect that. It seems witnesses can do this and create a lien on property. So we're going to have two answers, Rabba and Rabbi Yosef. Each answer is going to be the same type of answer, just a little bit of a different type. But the gist of the answer is going to be that when Rav said this, Rav was only talking about a case where there is no lien on property. Okay, and what would that be? Either Rav Yosef Amar B'shtar Matana. The witnesses could come and write a document 10 times if they want on the same piece of land. If it was a piece of land the person got as a gift, okay? Because a gift is never given with achrayut. If I give you a gift of land and then someone seizes the property because I owed them money, you can't come back to me and say, hey, replace my gift. That wouldn't happen. So that's a case where there is no shibud, okay? And therefore, the witnesses can do that because they're not creating a lien on property. Rabba Amar, same idea, but b'shtar she'en bo achrayut. It was, you can only rewrite a shtar in a field if the shtar was sold to the person without achrayut. Remember, that goes back to our whole machloket that we had yesterday about, does that mean the shtar just didn't say achrayut? And if it didn't say there is no achrayut, or was this shtar that specifically said this was given without any sort of guarantee? And then you can rewrite that. But you can't you can't have witnesses write a document to replace a previous document if there's a lien involved, that document will create a lien on property, because Rav doesn't think that. Now, so what we did so far, let's just get the structure. We had a machloket, Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, what you do when half the shtar is paid. We had a little bit of, what their reasons were, a little bit. Then we went to Rav, who didn't hold like either one, and said only a court can do it. It was sort of like Rabbi Yehuda, but a twist on Rabbi Yehuda where it's only the court. Rabbi Yehuda thinks it's definitely witnesses, and we're going to see in a minute that the braita we quoted is Rabbi Yehuda who said it's witnesses. And then we said, but even Rav seems to contradict, Rav explained why he differentiates witnesses, Beit Din, because Beit Din Hefker, and the Adim don't have the power to do that. Then we said, but that contradicts what Rav said. And then we said, no, what Rav said somewhere else, that had nothing to do with lien property. Okay, Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef each gave an example of what it could be. It's not like Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef disagree. They're just each bringing examples of possibilities of what Rav was talking about. Now we're just going to go back to understand that braita, and from there we're going to delve a little more in depth into this. My braita. So the braita we quote at the bottom of Kufay and Amud Bet. What is that braita? Like, let's read the whole thing. To Tanya, it says in a braita, Hare shayu noshim bo 1,000 sus. So I owed you 1,000 sus. Uparamihem 500 sus. I pay back 500. Edim mekarim et hashtar v'kotvin lo shtar acher mizman rishon divrei Rabbi Yehuda. And there you see it's Rabbi Yehuda who said it. The witnesses tear up the original document and they write a new document saying that I owe you 500 zuz, and they date it the early date, the December 1st date. Rabbi Yosi Omer, shtar ze yehe munach bimkomo. We leave the original shtar. You get to keep the original one that says I owe you 1,000 zuz. V'yichtavu shavar. Okay, this is exactly what we saw before. And we write a receipt. I get a receipt that basically says I pay 500. I have to keep that so that when you pull out the 1,000, I say, oh, look, I already paid you 500. Now, Rabbi Yosi elaborates, just like in the Mishnah, but he says something else here. We talked about this yesterday, I believe. There's two reasons why they said we write this shovar. One is, one is that it's in order to encourage me to pay my loan back. Because if I have a shovar that says I owe you 500, and you have a document that says I owe you 1,000, I'm worried if I lose that shavar, you'll pull out your document, I'll have to pay 1,000. That incentivizes me to pay back the loan as quickly as possible. And as you're going to see, Rabbi Yosi in general holds that we're protecting the malve, basically, right? We want to protect the one who gave the loan, as we talked about before, Eved lo v'li'ish malve, right? The malve did a favor to someone. So, and also, you have to remember that in addition to that, we don't want to L'shalotin ol delet b'fnei lovim is always a big thing. We don't want people to stop loaning money because people need money and people have money that they can loan. And we want to create a society in which the money kind of goes around and gets loaned out to people. So we always want to side with the malveh, according to Rabbi Yosi. And therefore, in order to encourage this loan to be paid back as quickly as possible, we're going to let me have the shovar, my responsibility to return it, to protect it, doesn't get lost, and that incentivizes me to pay back as quickly as possible before my mice come and eat the document, or it gets lost. That's one reason. And another is to allow the creditor to collect from lien property from December 1. Sounds like he thinks that Rabbi Yehuda is saying, when we write a new document, it's dated the day of the new document, the day I pay back the money, which means there's no lien on the earlier property, and that's also unfair to the borrower. To which the Gemara says, but wait, look at the braita. What did it say? Rabbi Yehuda explicitly said, we're going to write it from December 1st. So that second claim of Rabbi Yosi is no different between Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yehuda, which is what the Gemara says. Rabbi Yehuda nami mizman rishon kamar. Rabbi Yehuda said when we rewrite the document, we predate it, in which case there's also a shibud. In other words, that second claim of Rabbi Yosi doesn't disagree. It's not any stronger in his position than it is in Rabbi Yehuda's, to which the Gemara says, this is how you should read this braita and Rabbi Yosi's two comments. Hachi ka'amale Rabbi Yosi the Rabbi Yehuda, or really his second comment. Imizman rishon ka'amarta, he wasn't sure what Rabbi Yehuda said about this man rishon or not. So if you're going to say we predate it to December, then I only have one claim against you, which is I want to have encouragement for the lova to return the loan as quickly as possible. And that's why I think that the lova should have to be responsible for the receipt. And if you think that when they rewrite the shtar, they use the date of that day they rewrote the shtar, then I have then I have two issues with your claim, with your opinion. Okay, and that's how we read it. That was just to explain the braita, but from there we expanded a little bit more on the opinions of Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to get to another thing, which is going to relate back, and we're going to see another machloket Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, that's going to be connected to this original machloket between them. Shtar shezmano, and the real topic here is what we call shtar me'uchar, a post-dated document. Okay, it's a good question, and I didn't find an answer for this. Why anyone would want a post-dated document? Okay, but a post-dated document we're going to talk about here. I mean, I know people post-date checks and things like that, so maybe it's kind of like that. But it seems here that the shtar goes into effect immediately, even though the date is later. That's why it's a little harder to understand. Like a post-dated check would only go into effect the date of the check. But this is where we took out a loan, let's say, and we just wrote that the loan is later, even though it was taken today. So I don't really know why someone would want to do this, but basically the rest of today we're going to be talking about this topic of shtar me'uchar. Shtar shezmano katub b'Shabbat o ba'asara b'Tishrei. This is a bit of a strange document. The date is on a Shabbat, which of course the court would not write, or anyone would not write a document on Shabbat, or on the 10th of Tishrei. Okay, they bring the most extreme of examples, I would say, right, on Yom Kippur. Okay, the date of the document happens to be Yom Kippur. Shtar me'ucharhu v'kasher. It's clear from this document that it was written earlier and just they stuck in a later date. Okay, and therefore it's fine because it's clear that the date was today and it was just written post-dated. There's nothing wrong, just like nothing wrong with a post-dated check, right? I mean, I guess the post-dated check, it just won't go into effect till later. So maybe you could say there is, but they say there's nothing wrong with the post-dated check document, although we're going to see maybe there is. So right now it sounds like it's fine. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosi posel. Rabbi Yosi says you can't do a shtar me'uchar. Okay, we don't yet know why. We don't yet know what. Hold off. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda comes and questions Rabbi Yosi and says, "V'haloma aseh ba lefanecha b'tzipori v'yichsharta." There was a case, it happened in Tzipori, the person brought a shtar me'uchar, and you permitted it. Amar lo kishichsharti b'zeh hichsharti. Well, when I permitted it, it was because it was just like this case. Okay, if you're thinking, what on earth does that mean? Yeah, nobody knows what that means. It doesn't make any sense. Didn't he just say it's no good like this? And now he says it is good like this? Okay, we don't know what this means, which is what the Gemara is going to ask immediately. V'ha Rabbi Yehuda nami b'zeh Amar. What do you mean? He said, Rabbi Yosi said, because it was like this, I permitted it. Rabbi Yehuda also thought, because it was like this, he permitted it. Rabbi Yehuda also thought cases like this would be permitted, and Rabbi Yosi disagreed with him. What's going on here? So Rabbi Predate comes along and rereads this source a little bit. Amar Rabbi Predate, hakol modim she'imuzkaknu la'onato shel shtar, ונמצאת עונתו מכוונת בשבת או בעשרה בתשרי, ששטר מאוחר הוא וכשר. He basically says they're not arguing about a case where it says the date was Shabbat or the date was Asara b'Tishrei. Okay, so even though that's very much what it looked like from the simple reading of the braita, that case they actually agree about. They disagree about a different case. Okay, and then we'll reread the braita according to Rabbi Predate after, but let's explain. If the doc, now what does it mean? Who's kaknu la'onato shel shtar? What he means is, okay, nowadays there's something called a 120-year calendar. There's also internet where you can find any date and what day of the week it'll come out on. You could ask Siri, you could ask anyone you want, and they'll just tell you. But in those days, it wasn't so simple. So if you have a document that comes before the court and it's got some date, it doesn't matter later, earlier, it could be it already passed, it could be the date was the document was written 3 years ago. But if you figure out that the date on the shtar was a Shabbos or the 10th of Tishrei, which isn't hard to figure out because it'll say Yud b'Tishrei, or for that matter, any Chag, okay, whether these dates came out on Shabbat, by the way, was difficult to figure out because of the way they did the months and the calendar and all that. But let's just, okay, if you could figure out that, right, also once they had a set calendar, it's more complicated because they didn't have everything, they didn't have calendars planned out that you could see easily. But if someone knew the way the calendar worked and the way they were planning to do the months, and, again, at a certain point, they already had this organized, and you could figure out, there was a set calendar. It's just, like I said, it just wasn't as easily accessible as nowadays. And you could figure out that the date was specifically meant to be on a Shabbat or a holiday. Then it's obvious that it wasn't written on that date. And it's obvious that it was written in advance, meant to be a shtar mu'uchar. Then we don't have any problem. Even Rabbi Yosi thinks this is okay. Now, again, we still don't yet understand why. Patience. If everyone can, so what this really means is if it's very clearly identifiable that it was a shtar that was written earlier for a later date, and it was written at a given time, but was post-dated, turning out to Amubet, everybody agrees that's fine. Lo nechleku ela b'shtar mu'uchar ba'alma. We're talking about a shtar that, okay, now, you can't tell from the shtar itself that it was post-dated, but, well, how do you know it's post-dated then? So they say witnesses came and said this was post-dated, okay, and then you find out it was post-dated, but you can't tell from the shtar itself. To Rabbi Yehuda l'ta'ameh. Now that's what they argue about. So I just want to go back for 1 minute, because before we understand why, at least we can understand how this braita reads. The braita started off with specifically not the second case that we just said they argue about. It was specifically about the case shtar shezmano katuv b'Shabbat or b'Sahara b'Tishrei. It was written on Shabbat or the 10th of Tishrei. It's a shtar mu'uchar and kasher, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. We're now going to say Rabbi Yosi agrees with that. But Rabbi Yosi posel when? In a get, in a shtar that was post-dated, but it's not clear it was post-dated. Then Rabbi Yehuda says to him, and you permitted a shtar mu'uchar, to which Rabbi Yosi says, now you're going to understand this line, when I permitted it, it was because it was obvious it was a shtar mu'uchar. It was either written for Shabbat or it was written for the 10th of Tishrei or some holiday. It was hazeh. It was like that one, and that's why I permitted. Okay, but if it's not clear, I'm not going to permit it. Why not? Well, we're going to get back to what we keep talking about, concern for trickery, deceit. What's the issue? So Rabbi Yehuda permits a shtar mu'uchar because he's not worried about deceit. Why? Rabbi Yehuda l'ta'ameh, de'amal ein kotvin shoval. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda says, now it's a little bit of a different case, because the case in the Mishnah where we said we don't write a shovar was if I pay back half the loan. Here we're saying, Rabbi Yehuda must think also If I pay back the whole loan, we also don't write a shofar. Why would we want a shofar? Let's say I go to pay back the loan and you say I lost the document. So the obvious would be, well, write a shofar, right? Because maybe you didn't really lose the document. Maybe you're lying. I need protection that you're not going to pull the star out. Either you really lost it, but you'll find it later and then claim I owe you, or you really are lying. So we write a shofar and I keep the receipt. So if you pull out the document, I can prove it. So he says there's no such thing as a shofar. We don't do that. We don't allow a shofar. Okay, meaning if you claim, what it really means is if you want to collect your loan back, you must have that star. If you claim you lost it, they won't let you get your loan back. That's Rabbi Yehuda. V'lo nafik minei chorva. Now, since there's no shofar, there's no worry of deceit. No concern for deceit. Okay, you might not know why not, but let's see why there is concern for deceit, and then you'll realize why Rabbi Yehuda says there isn't. Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Yosi doesn't allow a shtar mu'char because he says the amar kotvin shoval v'nafik minei chorva. Since we write receipts, so let's go back to our example. We took a loan on December 1st, but we wrote on the loan February 1st. Okay, we post dated it. Now, if I pay you back on January 1st, what will happen? I'll get a receipt on January 1st, dated January 1st, that says I pay back the loan. And because what happened? You claimed I lost the document. I say, okay, write me a receipt, which is what Rabbi Yosi says we could do. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't allow that, so there's no problem. But Rabbi Yosi says, we'll write a receipt, and then I'll pull out, now, comes February, you pull out the document, you owe me money. And I say, or let's say comes March, right? You say, oh, look, we took a loan in February. And I'll pull out my receipt that says I paid you back, but my receipt says January, and your document says February. So when March comes along and you claim, but the loan happened in February, and what you paid me back for in January must have been for something else, and go prove it, right? Well, probably we tore up the document. There is no document. And basically you can claim that I pay you the money twice. So that's what Rabbi Yosi is concerned for. And it's only a concern if we write shofarim. So therefore, you see how these are interconnected. If you can write a shofar, then you can't have a post-dated document. If you can't write a shofar, then we're not worried about any deceit, and you can write a post-dated document because nothing, right? It's not, the only thing is, I mean, obviously, like there's an issue with the property lien. The property will only be lien from February, and the truth is, maybe that's the reason why they did it. You know, the borrower said, I only want to have my property lien from February, and the Malve agreed, you know, and they agreed to it, okay, and it was fine because they agreed. But if you write shofarim, it could really cause a problem. So now, I'm a Rav Huna Bered Rav Yehoshua. Afilu Laman Damar. Now, remember I noted before that the Machloket Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Yehuda was about writing a shofar on part of the amount. But now it seemed like we were talking about they have the same opinion writing it for the whole amount. So now we're going to see, do those two Machlokot go hand in hand or not? So Rav Huna Bered Rav Yehoshua says, Afilu Laman Damar Kotvin Shoval Hani Mile Apalga. Avalakule lo. Rav Huna says, wait, even if you say you write a shofar, like Rabbi Yosi, he only thinks you write a shofar on part of a loan. He doesn't think you write a shofar if he thinks, okay, now what does it mean to not write a shofar? He thinks that if you come and collect your full loan and I'm about to pay you and I say, okay, give me the star, and you say, oh, I lost it, we don't write a shofar then. And that means you can't get your loan back at all unless you pull out a star. Okay, it's a loss for the Malvin. So he thinks that if that's the case on the whole thing, no. But the Gemara points out, Velohi, this is not true. Afilu akule katvina. Okay, Rabbi Yosi would hold no. What we thought a few minutes, just 3 minutes ago, that the same machloket applies for half a star, a whole star. Yes, it's true. Rabbi Yosi, okay, it's not what Rav Huna Bered Rav Yehoshua said. The Gemara says no. Rabbi Yosi actually thinks you write a shofar in any case. Okay, writing these receipts is a given. Whether you say I lost the document or whether you say you only pay me half. So we just write a receipt, and it's my responsibility to watch that receipt as the borrower. So now we're going to see, how do we know this? How does the Gemara? Why are they so clear about this? Well, we're going to have a story. And similar to yesterday's, we have a case where Rav Yitzki had Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef have a masik bezuze bar Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba owed Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef money. Apparently, this was a common thing. He borrowed money from him because we saw it already. that he borrowed money in a different situation. Ata the Kamid Rabbi Chanina bar Papi. Last time they went in front of Rabbi Yitzchak. This time they go in front of Rabbi Chanina bar Papi. Amarle, these are all Amoraim in Eretz Israel, which is important for the continuation of the story. Amarle havle zuze. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef comes to court, says to Rabbi Abba, give me my money. Amarle havli shtara yushkol zuzach. Okay, bring me the star and I'll give you the money. Amarle shtarach irkasli. Classic claim. I lost the star. Can't help you. Echtov lach tavra. I'll write you a receipt that you paid the money. Amarle. So comes Rabbi Abba and says, Ha Rabu Shmuel de Amri Travayu ein kotvim shaval. But Rav and Shmuel both say we don't write a shavar. Remember, Rav held somewhat like Rabbi Yehuda's position, right? Not like Rabbi Yosi at all, right? He held like Rabbi Yehuda, but different from him because he said not the witnesses. The witnesses can't write the new document, right? But he basically claims you rip the old document, you write a new document because he didn't think that you write a shavar. It was just the whole thing was that the court has to write it, but he didn't think you write a shavar. And not only that, but Shmuel. So you're talking about the big Amoraim in Babylonia. They all think you don't write a shavar. And therefore, which means, again, I don't have to pay you back until you produce a document and I rip it up. But Amal, he says back to him, I respect Rav and Shmuel greatly. And they're dead in their grave right now. If you were to bring me dust from their grave, I would put it in my eyes. Sounds a little strange, but what he's saying is I have such respect for them. Okay, it's a way of saying I treat them with the utmost respect. I think what they said is amazing. However, big however, ha Rabbi Yochanan v'harish Lakish. But the biggest Amoraim in Israel don't agree with Rav and Shmuel. De'amrei travayu kotvin shaval. They both think that you write receipts. And if that's not enough to convince you, when Rabin came to Babylonia, Amar Rabbi Eli, he said the name of Rabbi Eli, which was another big Amora in Eretz Israel, Kotvin Shoval. We write Shovalim. So basically he says, I don't accept Rav and Shmuel. I go by the Amoraim of Eretz Israel. Remember, these were Amoraim of Eretz Israel. It's not clear to me if they were in Babylonia at the time, because they are talking about how Rav brought the Torah, but they're Amoraim of Eretz Israel, and he basically quotes all the Amoraim of Eretz Israel who say, the great Amoraim, we write shofarim. So basically, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef says, write me a shofar. Okay. Umistabra. And now the Gemara tells us, actually, it makes a lot of sense. De kotvin shoval. It makes a lot of sense to say kotvin shovar. Why? De isal kadatach, right? It's fun when the Gemara does it. They don't always spell everything out for you, but they say it really nicely here. If you say kotvin isal kadatach in kotvin shovar, if you think that we don't write a shofar, let's go back to our case. Avad shtaro shalzeh. What if you really did lose your star, the creditor, right? They really lost their star. What? Yochal hola v'chade? The love gets to eat the money, meaning the love can enjoy the money, v'chade, and they'll be all excited and happy and rejoice because they don't have to return the loan just because the guy lost the document. That seems very unfair. Okay? So they're basically saying logic would state shofar makes the most sense because in a case where, and again, we've talked about this already in the beginning of the Masechet in Chazkat Abati now, how people often lose shtarot. And, again, things happen. Water damage in their house could ruin their shtar. All sorts of things could happen. Mice could eat them. It could just get lost. How much can you expect someone to save their shtar? It's unfair to the malveh. Matkifla Abaye. Abaye says, wait a minute. On that same logic, you could take it the other direction. Because in the end, it's either the lovet or the malvet, right? The creditor you're all worried about. What about the borrower? If we write shovarim, if you can write a shovar on an entire complete loan, then what will happen, obviously, right? Elamai kotvin shovar. You think then, so we write shovarim? Avad shovaro shalzeh yochal halav echade. What if the borrower loses the shovar that says I paid? And then the creditor is going to come and demand this loan twice and be all excited. I got to cheat this guy and got my loan back twice. That's also unfair. So either which way it's unfair, to which we go back to what I said earlier, which is Amrle Rava in. Rava says in is yes. You're still, I would say, better to write the shovar because Evan Lova Liish Malve. If we're going to side on one side, in other words, this way, right? One is good for the malve and one is good for the love. And what he basically says is we have this idea, it appears in a pasuk in Mishlei, that the love becomes a slave, enslaved, so to speak, to the malve, because the malve did a nice thing and a really important thing that helped the love, and therefore the love becomes, from the moment of the loan, the love is basically subjugated himself to, or herself to, the creditor. And therefore, we're going to side on the creditor's side. And that's why, yes, the love will have to keep the shovar. And if the love loses it, tough luck. But we're going to write shovarim. So even though there's this big machloket, do you write a shovar, do you not write a shovar, which started in the Tanaim, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi, continued to the Amoraim, Rav and Shmuel saying no, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish saying yes, and Rabbi Ilah and others. Gemara concludes in the end, which is interesting, it's the Babylonian Talmud, ends up holding by the rabbis in Israel, basically saying we write shovarim. Now we're going to talk about this idea of a post-dated document, and we're going to start with the Mishnah in Shvi'it, okay, about Shemitah, and it's because they were talking about pruzbal and loans. So Tnanatam, it says there in the Mishnah, Shtarei chov hamukdamim psulim v'hamu'ucharim ksherim. We're going to go over similar concepts, but we're kind of attacking it from a different perspective now. So this Mishnah says, if you have a predated document, that's definitely disqualified, because basically if the loan only happened in December and the document is dated September, well then the creditor can come back later and take land that the borrower sold between September and December, and poor, those buyers never knew there was a loan because the loan didn't exist at that point and the document didn't exist and they just predated it, and they'll get their land seized from them incorrectly, and that's not allowed. So that's a document that's definitely problematic. Hamu'ucharim, though, are kshirim, because there's no problem of the lien property, and a mu'uchar get, a mu'uchar shtar. So now, Amar Rav Hamnuna. Rav Hamnuna now talks about the shtar mu'uchar, this post-dated document, and he says, Lo shanu ela shtarei hava'ah. A mu'uchar document is only good in a loan document. Aval shtarei mekach umemkar afilu mu'ucharim nami psulim. Okay, now, if you have a document of sale, you can't post-date it. Why not? Well, he's going to explain. My timer. Zimnin is going to be very similar to what we said before with the loan, and then the Gemara is going to go back and say, why aren't you worried about this with the loan? Were we worried about this concern with the loan? And we were. So we'll get back to that. But Zimnin de Mezabin le Ara b'Nisan, v'katav le b'Tishrei. Okay, their example is Nisan and Tishrei. So you bought land in Nisan. 6 months later in Tishrei, right? You date the document for 6 months later. What happens? So you sold me land. And the document says, I bought the land in Tishrei, but I really bought it 6 months earlier. Now, within those 6 months, when you sell me land, why did you sell me land? Because you have no money. You somehow win the lottery, get money, and mitrame lezuze bene bene, you end up getting money somehow. Zaven lemine. Your investment comes back, something. And you repossess the property. So you buy back the property from me. Now what happens? So we have a document that says, right, we bought it in Nisan. I bought it from you in Nisan, but it says I bought it from you in Tishrei. And let's say in ER, right after Nisan, you buy back the property and you have a document that says you bought it in ER. Obviously, what's going to happen? Chimate Tishrei, when Tishrei comes around, so you're going to say you bought it in ER. Okay, you have a document that says that. But when Tishrei comes along, I go to court and I say, hey, this land is mine. And I say, here's my document. And it's dated after your document that says you bought it. But it's not really true because I sold it back to you. But the date was off. And because of that, I could trick you. So that's why you can't. So comes Rav Hamnuna and says, even though the Mishnah says mu'uchar is kasher, they're not talking about an ishtari mekach. To which the Gemara says, if that's what you're concerned for, as we already explained, that same concern should also exist in loan because of the shovar and the whole problem there. Okay, now this is just going to be a review of what we saw before. Zimna diyazet b'Nisan, you'll lend me money in Nisan, v'kativ le'shtara b'Tishrei, and we'll date it Tishrei, which is basically a shtar chov mu'uchar for a loan. And I'll pay you back in ER. And I'll say, give me the document, I want to tear it up. And you'll say, oh, sorry, I lost the document. And you'll write me a shovar. And then when the date of the loan comes up, that it's said on the loan of the document, the post-dated document, You'll pull out the star that says Tishrei. I'll pull out my shavar that was written 5 months earlier, and you'll say, oh, that was a different loan. You must have paid me back for some other loan because this is a loan that happened after the date of the shavar. So, Rav Hamnuna, how can you say shtar mu'uchar is kasher in loans and not in mekach u'memkar? Because if you're going to say it's not mekach u'memkar because of the deceit issue, same deceit issue could happen with loans because of the shavar. To which they're going to obviously answer, and this will show that you understood what happened in today's daf. Kasavar en kotvin shoval. Rav Hamnuna, who differentiated between the shtarei halva'ah and the shtarei mekach u'memkar, and isn't concerned for deceit in the halva'ah case, must hold that we don't write shovarim, like the opinion of Rav and Shmuel before, and that's why there's no concern for deceit, because if there's no shovar, then there's no concern for deceit. Now comes the kind of easy and very interesting part of today's daf, which becomes even more interesting at the beginning of tomorrow's, which is, comes the Gemara and says, ha'idna. So that seems to say, by the way, that the only way you can write a shtar mu'uchar in a loan case is if we don't write shovarim, because otherwise, if you write a post-dated document, there's a problem if there's a shovar, because the shovar could be an earlier date. So come the rabbis, Amarle Rav Yemer the Rav Kahana, either Rav Yemer to Rav Kahana, or Amarle Rav Yomi Difti the Rav Kahana. Somebody comes to Rav Kahana and says, Va'ina de katvinan shtari meuchare v'katvinan tavra. But wait, look at what we do nowadays. We also write post-dated documents and we write receipts. So how are we protecting how is the borrower protected from not getting demanded to pay the money twice? So Amalei, Batar de Amalahu Rabbi Abba L'Safre, he says, well, this is after, the reason why we do this is because Rabbi Abba told his Sofrim the following. He told them like this, Ki katvinan shtari meuchare ktuvu hachi. If you're going to write a post-dated document, write it in the document the following words. Shtara denan lo bezimne katvine ela achrenuhu v'katvenuhu. This shtar was not written in Tishrei, let's say, right? But we post-dated it, okay? Which reminds us, by the way, of the Yud B'Tishrei and the Shabbat one. When it's clear it's post-dated, then you're not worried because everyone knows if somebody pulls out a shavar, they won't say, oh, that predated the loan and it's obviously connected to a different loan because we know it was post-dated and then we have no idea when it was actually written, but it basically permits this shavar to be accepted and you won't demand it twice. Okay, so you're wondering why this is so interesting. Well, it becomes interesting because but we don't do that anymore. In other words, it was nice. Rabbi Abba suggested this, but nobody does this. So how are we protecting ourselves? Well, Batar de Amarle, Rav Safra, the Safra, he says, well, after that, Rav Safra told his Sofrim the following. Ki katvinu hane tavre. Rav Safra told the people who write shovarim. And he said, when you write receipts, there's two tracks now. Iyadita zimnu deshtara katvuhu. If you know the date of the shtar, whatever it was, now remember, you're writing this usually because there is no document in hand. But if you know that the date was before the date of the shovar, so you can write that you can date the shovar. Ilo ktuvu stama. If not, leave it blank, the date on your shovar. And once there's no date on the shovar, then you can't claim that was for a different loan because we don't know when the shovar was. So leave it open to chol emat and nafik lare, because if the person takes out the shtar, right, it could be to their detriment if it has a date. So, and it's again, because if the person pulled out the real shtar, right, the original shtar that they claim was lost, it could be to their detriment, to the detriment of the borrower. And therefore, so we have two solutions that people taught their sofrim. If you're going to write a shtar muchar, either do this, or if you're going to write a shovar, don't write a date, so that. Now, why is this going to be super interesting tomorrow? Because it's going to continue, and Amalei Rav Ashi Rav Kana, but we don't do that and we don't do that. So how do we protect from deceit? And what's more interesting is the answer that he's going to give him, and you'll have to wait till tomorrow's daf to see that, right? How are we protecting our, if the rabbis, and basically the rabbis said do this, the rabbis said do that, but people aren't doing it. So how do we protect ourselves? Well, you'll wait to hear the answer tomorrow. So if you're really desperate, the shiur is going up in a few minutes after class. So what do we have today? This big machloket, Rabbi Yosi for Rabbi Yehuda, which was also in a case, it seems, of paying back part of a loan. We have Rav who said only the court can rewrite that because of the shibud and all that. The Eidim don't have the power to do that. Then we got into, from this, the whole concept of a shtar mu'uchar, and we saw that they have the same machloket there, whether you can write a shovar or not in a full loan. and that would affect whether there's concern for deceit in a shtar me'uchar or not. And basically, then we went to this other Mishnah that talks about a shtar me'uchar. We talked about Rav Hamnuna, and we said he must hold Inkatun Shofar. We saw there was a big machloka between the Amoraim in Babylonia and the ones in Eretz Yisrael, whether we write Shovarim or not. And then we saw that even though the Amorei Eretz Bavel said we don't write Shovarim in the earlier generation, by the time we got to the later generation, they were already doing it. And then they said, well, how do we protect ourselves from deceit? And there were all these solutions employed by the rabbis to tell the Sofrim, this is what you should do to resolve it. However, in the end, people weren't doing that either. And then the question is, well, how did they protect themselves from deceit? Or maybe even did they protect themselves from deceit is really the question. And wait till tomorrow to see what they have to say. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and Shema B'Sorot Tovot. Don't forget to register for the Siyum and to join our circle of friends.